Prawn here with some Aska tips and tricks and a variety of different ones. Like, did you know that if you make an outhouse, you can poop in it? And pooping in it allows you to get compost. So this is actually handy for having, because you can use the compost to fertilize your farm and thereby help with the growing of plants. You will also find that your villagers will also poop in it, so they'll go pooping as well, and then you'll get more compost, and that will be used by any villagers that are set to farming for composting. Now, if you're terraforming, you might find you want to flatten out a bit of land, but you can't. So you'll see when we've got the terraforming tool here, I'm trying to make this land a little bit flatter so it's easier to get into the workshop, but there's still lumps and bumps in it, and it's a bit awkward, and it's problematic. And sometimes you'll try and do this at different angles, and some of the squares will be green and some will be red, and it just doesn't work properly, and you just can't get anywhere with the terrain leveling tool. But what I found is you can actually use other things. So you can see I've got this bump here, but if I go into the build menu and then put a campfire down and then level that out, and then dismantle the campfire, what you'll find is the bump that was there is no longer there, so it's actually helped flatten it out. The campfire trick can also be used for other things. So I found I've got this area of my base that I want to do some building in, but there's these annoying rocks that are in the way. If you put a campfire down really close to them, when you go to level out the land, sometimes that just destroys those rocks in that area. I found this works for a number of the small rocks in a space and can be really helpful for just dismantling those. Now, it doesn't unfortunately work on the large rocks, so this massive one that's next to me I can't get rid of, but I can get rid of these other ones, which means that it then freeing up the space to build other things. When you kill enemies like skeletons and other enemies, if you harvest their bodies, sometimes they'll drop a weapon. You can take that weapon to the Tinkerer's table, which is available in the improved metalworking house, and then study it. And then when you study it, you'll get knowledge of that weapon. Keep studying it, and eventually you'll unlock the ability to craft it. You can get villagers to do this as well, which can be handy. Another thing that's good to know is about the housing. So you start off with a basic shelter, which will house one person, and then eventually you can build a cottage. In this cottage, you'll notice that I put multiple beds. As standard, a cottage will only hold 2 people, which isn't great because it does take quite a lot of effort to build. But if you go into the menu and upgrade options on the cottage, you'll find that there's a thatch bed in there that you can build. Now, you can go into the cottage and basically access the building options for that, and then put down these thatch beds in multiple places. Press L when doing it, and it'll allow you to put down several beds, and you can put 6 beds in here total, so 4 extra based on what's already there. Now, it does require thatch and sticks in order to build, so the thatch is a little harder to get, but then when you do it, you can then have 6 people in there. I'd highly recommend building a sled as soon as you can. A sled is something that you can use, take around with you, and it allows you to store a lot more things on there that you can carry on your person. Sled's accessible from the build menu, and then you can see you've got a cargo section down the bottom, basically. Usually this is for the warehouse, but the sled can be crafted any way you like. You can just basically put the build menu down and then build it. A sled is really useful because it has small, medium and large storage, and as you can see, you can fit 6 large stones on it, for example, and you can also put large rocks on there or other things. Now, you can put a lot of things on there and then take them back to your base. This makes life a lot easier because you can obviously collect these bigger things that would otherwise have to carry individually one at a time. But eventually you can even build an improved version of the sled that has wheels and allows you to carry even more. But that's a bit more complicated to build, and it's a bit further into the game. You can get a sled pretty early on. I highly recommend getting it and taking it with you wherever you go. Now, from the sled, villagers can actually take stuff as well, and you'll see there's a whitelisting option here, so you can stop them from doing that if you want to, but it is handy because they'll take stuff from there and then they'll go and use it for the build process, for example. What you might not have realised is there's a strong attack. If you don't read the menu options and the button presses on the right and left hand side of the screen, you might not have realised there's a strong attack, which is right click on your mouse. Right clicking is very handy because you can basically use it to damage the enemies really easily, no matter what weapon you're using. They're pretty stupid, so they'll come up to you and then they'll try and hit you. If you dodge that first attack, you can then use the heavy attack and then just keep using it. Watch your stamina though, but if you keep using it, keep bashing them, eventually you'll damage them enough that they'll be stunned, knocked over, or easily killed, so you can just keep strong attacking. It's actually a pretty easy way of dealing with them. Another thing that isn't immediately obvious is the ability to swap items. So if you go into a storage section, you might think you have to drag and drop things in. You can see you doing that here, but actually if you right click on your mouse button on your storage, when looking at another storage, for example, it will just flick it over there really quickly, as you can see with those items being moved across. So just right click for ease. Also, holding T picks up multiple items of the same type when you're looking at it. So if you press Z to highlight everything in the surrounding area, and then you want to pick up something particular, like bark, for example, just look at the bark, press and hold T, and then it will suck up all the bark in the surrounding area in a close proximity to where you are. But this makes it easier to pick up lots of things at once if that's something you need to do and you want to focus on getting bark. And bark is useful. I'll show you one in a second. Also useful to have a healing hut. If you notice you hear like a thumping sound, like a heartbeat, that indicates your health is getting low. If you build a healing hut, you can go in there and you will get healed. Now, you'll get healed if the fire's on, but also if you assign a villager to it, it'll go over and it'll keep hitting you with things that will heal you much more quickly. So they'll hit you with these sticks, which then basically heals you up nicely. So it's worth having a healing hut and someone working in there. I found that it's really helpful to pin build recipes. So if you're trying to build a building, if you pin it, you can then see what's happening when you're out and about. Sometimes the villagers will build it for you if they've got the relevant parts to be able to do it. Now I can see that I need bark instead of whatever else I needed beforehand, and you can keep an eye on the build process. So the villagers are really handy in a number of ways, and when you assign them to buildings, you can also give them specific tasks. So I've got a worker in here assigned to the woodcutter's shed. And what I'd highly recommend with this is actually setting thatch and bark to very high. You'll find that you need thatch and bark quite a lot, especially early on in the game and even later on in the game. For example, you'll need that thatch when you want to put the beds into the cottages, as I showed you, and you're going to need a lot of thatch, so it's really good to get the workers to do that for you. Now, you'll also find that reeds on the beach give you thatch, so any beach location will have reeds on it, and there's usually a lot of them. The thatch is useful for, as I've said, for the buildings, for the roofs and for the beds, but you can also right-click on it and turn it into fibres. Fibres can then be used to craft rope. So fibres will become particularly useful early in the game because you need a lot of fibres to make ropes, and fibres are also used for other things. But what you'll find is you can also get fibres from bark. And one way to get bark is to chop a tree down, but also when a stick or a log falls on the ground, if you chop that down as well, you'll get extra bark. So there's even more bark there. So if you desperately need loads of bark, just chop down a tree, and every part of the tree that breaks down, so the big parts of it, chop that down as well. Turn that into bark, then turn the bark into fibres, and then you can turn the fibres into rope, and then you can use the rope to craft other things. So it's worth having those fibres. If you press tab, you can manage the villagers and the structures in your village, and this can be handy to keep an eye on how happy your villagers are, but also the specific buildings. So when you've called in a new villager, you can go to the housing section and you can assign them to a house, for example, and you can see who's in what house quite easily here and assign new people to them if you've got space in those after you've built more beds in there. But you can also go to specific structures and assign people to it, so you can find a structure that doesn't have somebody in it and work out what you need and whether you're going to need someone in there. So for example, we can go to the fisherman's hut, and from there you can then choose someone. Now when you first call someone in, they'll usually be set as a builder as default, and then you have to assign them to a building when you want them to do work in there. It's worth having a few builders because they'll help you with the building of your village, but then at some point you might want to assign them to be a fisherman, for example, and you can see what their current level of skill is, so it's worth trying to find someone that fits the bill in this. Now, when you go to call someone in, you'll be able to hover over their perks and see what the benefits of those are, and some of them might point to the buildings that they should be put into. But you'll also find things like this, where this particular person is better at night, so they're actually better at working at night, and they prefer night time, so there's a bonus and a benefit to this. So when you go to call them in, what you can do is you can then assign their working hours. So eventually when they come in, you'll see the new villagers arrived. You get the notification on the right hand side. Press tab, assign them to a building to give them somewhere to live and work out what you want to do with them. If you go to their menu, then specifically you can then go over to the area here where you can choose and set what time of day they're working, and their sleep and leisure hours. So in this instance, I'm changing the default and setting them so they work at night. I'd also recommend making sure they've got a lot of leisure time or breaks for lunchtime if you're setting them as day workers, so that they're happy and have a good amount of time during the day to do what they need to. Here I'm going to show you how to craft iron tools and iron weapons in Aska and the various different steps you need to do that, because first of all you're going to need to find some iron ore, then you're going to need to make it into iron bloom, then you're going to need to process that bloom and then craft it into the metal parts. So there are various different things that you need and various different steps that you're going to need to follow along the way. There are also mistakes that you can make that can ruin the process or can slow you down and can cause issues. So I want to talk to you about what those are and how to avoid them, how to get iron ore, how to process it, how to get more of it, and other things. So stick with me to find out all about that and all the different things you need to know. The first thing you need to do is to find an unexplored cave. I'd highly recommend doing this initially in the game before you even set up your base. Go around the map, find an unexplored cave, set up your base in a flat area nearby. This will make getting iron ore and processing it into weapons a lot easier later on. So if you can do that early, it's really good and an excellent way of doing it. Then you just need to find the unexplored cave, which you'll see will get revealed here. Press B to open up the build menu and put a mine on it so that you can access the inside of it. You can then assign villagers to work in there or go in there yourself and harvest iron ore from the iron deposits. Obviously, you'll need a pickaxe in order to be able to do this, but if you keep bashing at these rocks, eventually they'll drop a bunch of iron ore deposits on the ground, and then you can pick those up. You can also do this by blowing up walls, and I'll show you how to do this later on. So you can blow up some walls, and then you can mine the walls, and then you'll get iron ore out of that as well, so that's another way of doing it. Also make sure you build a load of torches, because you can put them in the pillars in the cave, and that will help your workers when they go in there, when they're looking to build things. So in order to do this process, you're going to need a pyre, and in the pyre you put a bunch of firewood, which will then turn into coal. Then you take the coal and your iron ore over to the bloomery and put some iron ore into the furnace. Now what you want to do is to basically have a lot of coal and a little bit of iron ore in the furnace. And this is my first and most important tip for you. What you'll find if you try and put too much iron ore in here is it won't work. You need a ratio of a lot more coal to iron ore. And so I'd recommend about 5 iron ore. Then press and hold E to ignite the furnace to get it going. You can access the furnace storage by pressing T on that before you start that process to basically interact with it and put your coal and iron ore in there. And then you need to go and interact with the bellows. Now, in order to use the bellows, you have to press E, but don't tap it. We press it all the way in, then release to let the air in, then push it back again. Basically treat it like you would bellows in real life. You've got to let the air get in there and then blow through, so it's sort of a slow process. The goal here is to get the temperature of the furnace between the 2 white lines on the temperature gauge and try and hold it there. Don't go above or below that process, and then eventually the iron ore will turn into blooms. It is possible to get villagers to do this instead if you prefer, so what you need to do is to go to your bloomery, and I'd recommend trying to build an improved bloomery because it'll make it easier and optimize things. But you can go here and you can assign a villager to it and then set them to some tasks in order to do the crafting. What I found was in my tasks it was set so that there was trying to use far too much iron ore and not enough coal. And this caused problems because the bots then couldn't make the iron blooms because the furnace wouldn't get hot enough. So what you need to do is to make sure that this setting is right. Set it to 5 iron ore or metal scraps versus the coal, and then let it run like that as their task. It is possible later on to put more iron ore in there, but what you'll find is if you try and do it too early, like put loads in as I have here, that your coal ratio will mean that you can't get it to the right temperature. It's too hard to get it into the perfect temperature zone, and then you just run out of coal before you even manage to produce any iron blooms, and all you've done is waste materials while doing so. You can also do this the other way. If you try and get it too hot, you'll find that one of the iron blooms just turns into a slag and then is therefore unusable and useless to you. So you do need to make sure you get it into those 2 white markers on the temperature gauge and keep it there. Don't go over because that'll spoil some of it for you. which is obviously not ideal. So once that's done, you can then extinguish the furnace and then put the bloom onto the anvil here, and then you just need to hit it with a hammer. You can use any sort of hammer here, but what you'll see is there's options to rotate right and rotate forward with R and T. What you need to do here is to bash the external crust off the bloom once it's come out of the furnace, so just keep hitting it with a hammer. You'll find that the sound changes as you hit it. So once it goes to a ting, ting, ting sort of sound to it, a higher pitch sound, that means you've cleaned that side off and you can then rotate it to the next side. So you'll see you just have to keep hitting it. Basically, we're trying to get all the black off of it. Now, you can do it on your own, or you can do it with a friend, or obviously the villagers will do it eventually if you set them the task to craft these things in here. It does take some time because you have to do every side. And unlike other bits of crafting, you're not just rotating it right, you also have to rotate it forward. So you have to go through all the different directions to get it finished. But eventually you'll find it will then turn into the blooms, and you'll get multiple blooms from this one thing that you're bashing on there. Once you've done that, you then need to take the blooms over to your workshop and to your metal works. Make sure you've got a hammer for this next stage as well. If you break your hammer at any point, you'll need to get another one. We're looking for the forge here. The forge also requires coal, so make sure you've got some more coal on you. You're basically looking to put coal into that and then heat the forge up. And then what you need to do is you need to deposit your blooms in there, because you need heated blooms in order to craft them. So you put the blooms as they are into the forge, and then you have to wait for them to get hot. You'll see there's a little indicator bar on the bottom of them showing that they're heating up, and you have to wait some time for this in order for this to happen, and it takes a lot of time in order to do that, and then eventually they'll turn a different color and you'll see there's now a hot iron bloom. Now when you go to the anvil, you can interact with that and select the thing that you're trying to craft, so it's the blade or the axe head, for example. But you'll notice that you need a specific number of iron blooms in order to do this. So hopefully you've got a bunch in the storage on the right hand side of this building, and you can put extra into the forge. You should find that the villagers will put them in there if they've got tasks to do so. And then once this is done, you'll then be able to craft an axe head as an example. So then put some axe head onto there, and then you have to repeat the same sort of process we just did with the blooms. So essentially you have to just keep rotating it right and bashing it clean, and then you put it in the quenching trough, and then you take it out of the quenching trough and you take it to the crafting table, and from there you can then craft your axe, assuming that you have the other ingredients necessary for this. So you can see there are a lot of different steps in order to do this. Obviously you can assign villagers to craft these materials as well. Once iron ore in the cave starts to get low, you can go to your workshop, and then you can go down over here and you can make an exploding sack. Now this requires a Jotun stone, and it also requires a crawler sack, which I'll show you how to get in a second. But then you can take it into the cave, and you can find these walls in the cave here a bit further in that you can then use this to blow up. You have to obviously stand back for this, but what it will do is it will cause a cave-in in the cave here. And then once that cave-in's happened, you'll then find there's a bunch more walls, so multiple walls, that you can then knock down and get more iron from. So you'll be able to get more iron ore from this. So you'll find there's then cave walls in here. So this is a good way of basically regenerating the iron ore in the cave when it starts to run out, because you will find it runs out eventually, which is an issue. In order to get the crawler sacks, you first need to defeat the crawler and the little crawlers in there, and then you'll find that there's eggs inside the mine, and if you harvest them, some of those eggs will then drop the crawler sacks from them. So occasionally it seems to be a bit random and doesn't happen with every egg, but basically you destroy the eggs and harvest the creatures, and then you'll get crawler sacks that you can use for the bombs. I'd also recommend building a metal parts collector, because eventually you'll find in the storage of this that randomly you'll find metal parts have just been put in it, and you can use those for crafting. So this is good if you're running low on iron sources. Also search enemy corpses for metal scraps, and those can be used in place of iron ore as well, and then you can use those for crafting too.